Let's go for it! I like the dark stuff. Give me the dark stuff. I like the dark stuff. Give me the dark stuff.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hey, it's me, your buddy Dave, the host here of the Dark Stuff channel. Thanks a lot for checking out the new video. This is Dark Stuff number 199. And on this one, I'm bringing back my friend Joey. We had such a successful video a couple videos back that we decided to team up again, get the band back together, do another one. And on this one, we took the idea of taking 3 different albums, random choice. We could pick whatever 3 we wanted to. That kind of reminded us of a particular place, a particular time, a particular event in life, and just relay those albums and talk about them a little bit and sort of tell the stories behind why those albums are so significant. So again, this is another good one. You're going to like this. Thanks a lot for checking it out. All right. So Joey, welcome back to the Dark Stuff.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're doing another video. Our last one was a smash success, so much so that somebody who shall remain nameless totally copied the idea and made another video about 2 weeks later. But I'm not saying they saw ours first. I'm just saying we did it first.
Right.
That's all I'm saying. So,
well, maybe not first, but
well, whatever.
Yeah.
The point is, we were before this person, so that's all. That's as far as I'm going to take it. I'm not trying to start some feud,
No, I think it's awesome. Let people continue the conversation. So
absolutely, a little credit wouldn't hurt, but whatever. That's
right.
okay. So we decided to do another. This time we're going to take like 3 albums that are pretty significant to us, that have an attachment to like a time or a place or a specific event in our lives, and we each picked 3. And we're just going to tell the story, and I'm going to let you go first. I don't know, how do you want to do this sort of chronologically, or how? I mean,
No, I don't think it has to be in any order.
Okay.
I think it can just be whatever you want to talk about, and just kind of like a little brief summary on why the album was important, or maybe it wasn't even like why it was significant to you, or.
Well, I've got stories attached to all 3 of the albums, so
Okay.
We're good. But I'm gonna let you go first. You can take your first one up.
All right. Well, mine don't really have like significant stories, but my first album, when I think about quarantine, is the Fugees, The Score, because I didn't have many albums. Like, this album came out, I think, when I was in 7th or 8th grade, and I didn't have many albums then. And what do most 8th graders do with their life? They can't drive, they don't have a car, very little social life, so you're really just kind of like locked in your room with your records or the radio. And I remember the Fugees, The Score, was just a very, like I said, I didn't have many albums, but it was such a unique album. It wasn't anything I had heard before, and so when we were thinking about time and place, I was like, oh yeah, like that was kind of like the first like real, I don't want to say artsy, but just a very progressive like album that I had never heard before, besides, I had like Mariah Carey and Alanis Morissette, just kind of like typical radio pop stuff. And Killing Me Softly was very popular, in 1996. And that's why I bought it. But like listening to its entirety when you're like 13, you're kind of like, oh, this is like very political. I may not have understand it all because, just my age, but all like the different things that they kind of intertwine, anything from like, a song from the 50s that they looped to really intense dialogue to humorous dialogue. I don't know. It's just an album that really stands out to me. And when I think about places in time and we've been in quarantine, I thought about, oh, I remember being locked in my room listening to that album and just having it be something I had never really heard before. So
That's wild. Well, the only Fugees that I own is this Fugees
Yeah.
Greatest Hits, which,
Okay.
considering they only had 2 albums, that means
Right.
you got most of their catalog on a Greatest Hits because they didn't have a ton of songs. You know what I mean? But yeah, in 1996, I was definitely not in the 7th or 8th grade. I was 25, so I was already, a full-grown person at that point. And the Fugees are one of these groups that I kind of abandoned rap, and I'll be getting into that in a little bit later. By about 96, like I sort of was like, that was it for me. I'd liked the 80s and the 90s up to that point, and I was finding less and less hip hop that I was getting interested in. When the Fugees came out, they were instantly like, the first album nobody seemed to notice at first, but when this one, The Score,
Hmm.
it was kind of hard to ignore at that time. I mean, it just was so everywhere. The Fugees were everywhere. Lauryn Hill was
Yeah.
everywhere, and it was a really, really big record. And I understand why. It's still good. It holds up now. I
Yeah.
was listening to it on Spotify earlier because I didn't actually own it, and it was solid. And it's funny that you say like you're hearing sort of political things for the first time through this album, because I had a similar experience, not with the Fugees, but that's Public Enemy, like
Yeah.
back in the 80s
Totally.
when I was a teenager. And Chuck D used to say Public Enemy was like CNN for black people. And it was like also like CNN for like suburban white people in the 80s, because I was
Sure.
sort of introduced to concepts and topics and names and things that I didn't know about. And they definitely made me think and changed my perspective. So I know that hearing that stuff when I was like 15, 16 had a huge impact. So I could imagine, the Fugees would have sort of a similar kind of impact,
Yeah.
you know?
But it's a great
Yeah.
album. So yeah, that was one
Yeah.
of my top three.
And it's just fun too. You can listen to it and not necessarily be bogged down with politics if you don't want to
Sure.
hear that. Public Enemy, you don't really have a choice. It's like right
Right.
in your face. They don't give you an option of saying, well, I just like the music, or whatever.
No.
It's not something you can do with those guys, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, so okay, do you want me to do my first
What
one?
is yours? Yeah. I'm
Okay.
very curious because your selection really threw me off like big time. So
Well,
I'm curious to hear the background of these
okay, we're
albums.
gonna go in chronological order for me in
Okay.
terms of my life, not necessarily in terms of the albums being released, although that may be how it works out. So my first one is this one, Steve Vai, Flexible.
Okay.
Okay. Now this originally came out in 1984. I didn't know the album in 1984. I didn't hear it or know about it until probably 1986 or 87 or so. And the reason why I found out who Steve Vai was, because at the time he was an unknown guitar player who had been in Frank Zappa's band for a couple of years. He got hired by Frank when he was like 18 to be his guitar player and to do music transcription and stuff. But I only heard of him because when David Lee Roth quit Van Halen and he went solo, when this was his first solo album, Steve Vai was his guitar player.
Okay.
Okay. So that's where I first heard of Steve Vai. And I was a huge Van Halen fan. And when
Right.
that split happened in that band and they turned into Van Hagar with Sammy Hagar on the one side, and then David Lee Roth went off on his own, I hated Van Hagar from the beginning. I never liked it. I was all Team Dave, and I went full blown for David Lee Roth. And I liked Steve Vai a lot as a guitar player. Okay.
Yeah.
So this lengthy preamble to get to why that album is the way that it is. So I followed a little bit more of Steve Vai's career. I realized he played on a Public Image Limited album, the generic album that just says album on the front. He does the lead guitar on that. He had been in this band called Alcatraz that had a moderate, heavy metal hit a couple years
Right.
before. Then he went, after David Lee Roth, he went on to be in Whitesnake and whatever. This album, Flexible, just reminds me of 10th grade, right after 10th grade in the summertime in high school in Omaha. And most of my friends back then, when I was a sophomore, were a grade or two older than me. So a couple of older guys, and most of them were musicians. That wasn't why I knew them or why I hang out with them, but it just was a coincidence that most of these guys were a couple grades older and they all played music. And we had all these common bonds of music that we liked, like the Rolling Stones and and Van Halen and a couple others. But most people didn't really know anything about this Steve Vai Flexible album because it's so strange. But
Yeah.
our clique of friends just obsessed over that album. We all had it either on record or we made tapes of it for everyone. And it was like this little nerdy clique thing of we're the only people that know this music.
Yeah.
And when you present it to somebody, also there was a lot of drinking and drugs going on at that time. I might point out, just saying, you know.
I mean, listening to that album, did you take like your opening song for your show, like part from that album?
You're the first person that's ever caught that. Yes. Okay, I did. And I used to use more of it, actually. Like, if you go back maybe like 10 videos or so if you look in the archives or whatever, I used to use about 15 seconds of that song. It's where the girl goes, just go for it.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a guitar solo. Well, originally my intro music had the just go for it. And then it had some of Steve Vai for about 15 seconds. Then it faded into another guitar solo from Ace Frehley from Kiss. And that was my 30-second intro music. I used it for years and I never got caught. Nobody ever said anything. Then I got a copyright ding for the Ace Frehley part, not the Steve Vai part. So rather than get a copyright on every video I make, I just decided to take that all out.
Yeah.
But I still use the just go for it part. And you're the first person that's ever caught that or noticed it or whatever. So
well, when I was
kudos
listening to the album, I was like, I've heard this before. I've never listened to Steve Vai. I know of him. I've heard he's incredible, and he's obviously worked with a lot of bands. But
well, let me say this: I'm not exactly a huge Steve Vai fan. Meaning, I like that album. I love what he did with David Lee Roth. Everything else he's done, I kind of couldn't care less about, really.
Yeah.
You know, but this album is so fucking good. And I'm sorry I cut you off there for a second.
No, you're fine.
Okay, so the thing about this record is, and most people equate Steve Vai with guitar solos and boring instrumental, just wankery, you know, and that's kind of what he does. But this album was right after he left Frank Zappa, so it was all sorts of weird jazz, some weird pop. I mean, he has just straight up catchy songs on there, like a song called The Boy Girl Song, and another one called Lovers Are Crazy and Junkie, and these are just more pop songs that he wrote that are really good. There are some instrumental ones. I mentioned the drugs before. If you are on drugs, that intro song, that Little Green Man, kind of trips a lot of people out. It really kind of trips a lot of people out during that song. And I admit it did for me too, you know. It does grab certain types of people in with that. I know why it's first. But I guess the reason I chose it is just because it just reminds me of that summer and, you know, hanging out with my friends, and we'd sit around mostly in actually my parents' neighborhood now, which was completely undeveloped at the time. And we just used to hang out there and drink beer and smoke weed and whatever and listen to weird shit like that. So it was just a happy time, I guess, basically for that one.
Good times. Good time to reminisce on stuff like that rather than reflect back on anything bad. Well, yeah, that's a good, those are good albums. You're just like, oh, this takes me back. And that's what
it does. And playing it again, you know, to get ready for this thing, it was like, I'd forgotten how much I liked the album because I did sort of blow off Steve Vai after the mid 80s because it was you know, I didn't really care. And I have no interest in going back and listening to his other stuff, but Flexible will always be significant to me. And even now, just playing it in 2020, I still liked it. So
yeah,
there you go.
Very different. Was not expecting that.
No, and when you texted me and you were like, yeah, this is pretty, you know, different. It is very different, and it's very different from other Steve Vai albums, you know. So there are a lot of people who like Steve Vai who would listen to this and be like, I don't know, it doesn't sound like him, but yet it kind of does, you know. So, anyways, that's that one. So let's go to your next significant album.
My next one is Interpol, Turn on the Bright Lights.
Great record.
This album just reminds me of living in Chicago. I feel like it's a very cityscape soundtrack for the time that I was living there. It just I don't know, it just reminds me of living there. It just reminds me of, you know, being on the subway, and I feel like it was just a lot of that album is, I don't want to say it's instrumental, but it's kind of got this moodiness to it that just kind of reminds you of cityscapes, this gray cloudiness. Like I said, you know, just kind of like the hustle and bustle of the city, but it's very slow moving. And I don't know, like the intro song. Oh my God, I'm done. Sorry. I had it all up here ready to go to talk.
Yeah, that's okay.
Um,
I got my CD right here just in case.
So Untitled, like the first, oh, nice.
Yeah.
Untitled, like that's just an amazing track. I love that one so much. PDA, Rollin', the New, and the like Leif Erikson are songs that really stand out to me. I don't know, it's just like a really, I don't know. It just reminds me of walking with my headphones, and I feel like it was kind of like a soundtrack to my life living in Chicago.
I totally get that. It's got like a bleakness and a grayness, is what you said when you said it's kind of gray.
Yeah.
That's what that album feels like. And it's funny that the back cover is kind of gray, right? The front is this bright red, and then on the back it's kind of grayish.
Oh, very interesting.
And,
I was like looking at, I don't have the CD actual.
Oh,
page
that's
anymore,
yeah, that's this way. Yeah, this way with that one. But
I mean, yeah, look at the inside, you know, it's a very gray.
no, and I saw them on that tour, and they all wore like black suits, and it was really it was dark. And I always saw Interpol, and at least especially at the beginning of, obviously they're very influenced by Joy Division, who were very dark, and kind of it's downer music. It's not always something you put on when you're like in a super good mood. Hey, let's jump around and listen to Interpol. It's like, nah, that's not really what it's for. But no, I totally feel you on that. I never had that experience necessarily of living in a major city like that and kind of walking around in headphones with it. But I do know that album kind of hit me pretty hard. There's a lot of bands that try to do that Joy Division thing, and they usually don't always capture it. But like Interpol kind of did, and added their own sort of take on it. Obviously now here we are almost 20 years later, Interpol's still here. Joy Division had like an album and a half, obviously because the guy died, but they managed to ride with it for a really, really long time and have a solid
it's a classic. Did you see them when they came to Omaha a few months ago in September?
I didn't.
A few months,
I didn't.
like 6 months ago now.
No, it was like, maybe 6 months, a year ago. No, I didn't go to that show. I didn't. Did you go?
Yeah, I've seen them like probably 5 times.
I've only seen them twice.
Yeah.
Twice, and I wanted to go to that show, but then at the end, I just felt like I had a lot going on or something. I don't know what the actual excuse was, but I didn't end up making it.
I mean, but that opening, they opened with Untitled, and it's still like, it just still stands the test of time. Like, so. Anyways, that album means a lot to me, or reminds me of a significant part of my life, and I still love it. Like that one, I revisit that album quite often. So. Oh
yeah, this one I've never really gotten tired of it. It is kind of downer music, so yeah, you have to be in the right mood, Right. But I frequently am in a mood where I like sort of Interpol. I don't, the second album was very good, and I still feel like they make decent music for sure.
Yeah.
But nothing was as great as this one when it.
Oh, no, yeah.
I mean, it just can't be touched. That was a lot of bands, their debut isn't necessarily their best, but I think like with Interpol, it definitely was. Yeah.
It's great. What is your second album?
Okay, so my second album, because we're going in order, Elvis Costello and the Attractions, Blood and Chocolate. Okay, now, this album came out in 1986. I didn't really hear about it or get familiar with it till a couple years later, probably 90, 91, 92, something like that. And basically, the story is, it's not really so much a specific time or whatever, but there was this woman that I was just infatuated with, back then in 90, 91, 92 or something somewhere in there. I don't remember exactly. And she was a huge music fan, record collector, etc., which I had never experienced that. I not to sound like some old sexist guy, but back in the 80s, there just weren't that many women that were into records and collecting records. Everybody bought music, but being a collector is something different. You know what I mean? Like if you're going to get 10 versions of the same Stones album because they're all different countries or whatever, that's a different level of record buying than the average person. And that in my world had always been exclusively men. I didn't know any girls that did that. So she was. One of her favorites was Elvis Costello, and I pretended like I liked Elvis Costello, even though I didn't, because I wanted to kind of impress this girl. So I played it up like I liked Elvis Costello, and I started buying a couple of his albums, and none of it was really connecting with me at that time. I was totally living a lie, you know. I was just
Anything to
pretending.
do to press the girl. I mean,
Yeah. And at some point along the line, that situation, you know, it didn't go the way that I had wanted it to go. And I was super depressed about it and everything. And this album at that point connected with me all of a sudden. And it was real. It wasn't to impress somebody. It wasn't to try to do with, you know, whatever. It was like this album hit me like a fucking ton of bricks. It is a sad and depressing album. There's no question. I don't know what was going on in Elvis's life at that time, but he had to have been dealing with some pretty sad shit, because songs like, you know, I Hope You're Happy Now, I Want You, Blue Chair, Battered Old Bird, Poor Napoleon, they're all depressing love songs.
yeah, like I had never heard that album before, and I was like, ooh, what was going on in Dave's life during this?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I like Elvis Costello. I have a couple of his albums, but I had never heard of this album, and it was kind of like a side of Elvis that I had never. I'm used to, like, you know, his more upbeat poppy stuff.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I don't know about this side of Elvis. It kind of is just something I wasn't expecting from Elvis Costello. So it definitely sounds like a heartbreak album. I don't know if that's what it was.
It absolutely was. And the song I Want You is to me the absolute saddest, like, you know, end of love song or whatever kind of deal that I've ever heard. It's still sort of hard to hear for me when I listen to it, because it still can evoke that feeling of going back to being age 20 and remembering that girl and that whole situation. And even though I haven't seen or heard from her in decades, you know, it's like not even a big deal anymore. I hear that and it does kind of take me back. And on a side note, Fiona Apple did a version of I Want You, and Elvis Costello and the Attractions were the backing band. It was for this VH1 show that was on the TV like about 15 years ago. And
Awesome.
iTunes actually for a little while sold it as a single separately. It is so amazing to hear Fiona Apple do that song, because she has a lot of that sadness and whatever in it.
Totally.
And I kind of felt like I don't think anyone else could do that song but Elvis, because the way he wrote it and the way the words are. I was wrong. That Fiona version is sick. I mean, if you can find it on YouTube, if you can. I don't know if I don't think it's still on iTunes or whatever. I don't even know if iTunes is a thing anymore. People still buy shit on there. I mean, I don't know.
Around, like,
it's still around, I guess, but everyone just goes to Spotify or.
That's true. Well, yeah, I'll try to look it up. Yeah, that song actually is the one that stood out to me the most. It's just very heartbreaking song, and it's funny how, like, you don't listen to an album or a song, it takes you back to a particular moment where you're like, ooh, this reminds me of that, and you know.
Yeah, and that one does, and it's hard to hear, but that was a legit connection with Elvis Costello. And then after that, every single other record that I had bought in the past that really didn't do anything for me, all of a sudden connected with me. And now here we are 28 years later or whatever, and Elvis is one of my favorites, you know, of all time. I mean, I love 90% of his catalog is amazing, and I have almost everything. And that period of Elvis, which, yeah, this wasn't his most popular period. That was 1986. His career was kind of like, you know, middling a little bit. He had a comeback the next year where he had what the hell was
when
that
Pump
song?
It Up came out.
Well, no, Pump It Up was earlier. That was late 70s. He had oh Jesus, that song he did with Paul McCartney. Well, whatever. I'm drawing a blank on it. I know exactly what I'm talking about, and I'm gonna have to asterisk it, put it on the screen somewhere. Veronica.
Oh, Veronica.
Yeah. Okay, so he kind of had a hit the next year, and he wrote that with Paul McCartney. So that his career kind of started going up again. But that Blood and Chocolate is a forgotten gem, and anyone who I think is like serious into Elvis Costello connects with that album in a way that a casual fan might not. And so, but when I connected with it big time. And here we are almost 30 years later, and I'm a huge fan. So.
Awesome. Yeah, Elvis is great. I saw him open up for the Police, and I was super bummed that they didn't use the Jumbotron screen because I had nosebleed seats. And he sounded amazing, and I was super bummed that they didn't like put him on the big screen so you could see him from way in the back.
No, they never do that for the openers. When I saw Fiona Apple open for Interpol, they didn't put her on the big screens either.
Fiona Apple open for Interpol?
Oh no, I'm sorry, not Interpol.
I would be like, wow.
Fiona Apple opened for Coldplay.
Oh, okay.
Totally different. Sorry. And I saw that show, and Fiona was the opener, and they didn't let her be on the big screen either. It was lame. It's what they do for openers. I mean, the big headliner gets the stage. They get all the action or whatever. But yeah, exactly.
Well, that's a great story. I like that. That's really nice. It's a nice little story about that.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like
I didn't mean to laugh, but
no.
I love albums like that where they definitely, hold like a lot.
I'm laughing about it now. I went into that relationship under false pretenses, and look what it got me, nothing. But I'm now a huge Elvis Costello fan. Yeah, I got that out of it.
That's the silver lining.
Yeah, there you go. There's the silver lining. Okay. So now let's get your next one.
So I don't have the CD of it or album, but it's Houses of the Holy by Led Zeppelin.
Such a good album.
This just reminds me, I don't know where I was going, but I love the power of a song when you're just listening in your car. I was in my car, and I don't know, I was obviously going someplace really early in the morning where like the sun was just rising. And I bought that album because Dancing Days is on there, and I love Stone Temple Pilots at the time. I bought that album when I was in high school, and I became very much into like history, like, oh, I know this song, who originally, I didn't realize it was covered by another artist. Anyways, so I remember having this album in my CD player, driving somewhere really early in the morning, and the song remains the same as like the first song on there. And it's just kind of like this, I don't know, Destination Road song. It's just so powerful, and with the sun coming up, and there's really no significant, it doesn't take me back to any deep story, but it's just a great album. I love the Over the Hills and Far Away. It just kind of sounds like an adventure album, taking you to the ocean. Those are like some of my favorite tracks on there, and it's just kind of like a freeing record.
Yeah, I love nobody, I always hear people mispronounce the song. It's on side 2, Jamaica, okay?
Jamaica?
Which everyone pronounces as Dyer Maker, right? And I used to do it too for the longest time until I saw Robert Plant explain. It's how British people say Jamaica. So Dyer is Maker. Okay, so it's the word Jamaica, and it's kind of a reggae beat in the song. That's the big secret of that tune. I think it's hilarious that, they're this huge rock band, and in 1973, when this record came out, they're doing a reggae-inspired song. Interesting.
Okay.
Right?
Interesting.
I also love this album.
Okay.
It's really different in the Led Zeppelin canon because, their first 2 albums, they're kind of doing blues rock, a whole lot of love and whatnot. Led Zeppelin 3 was this kind of acoustic-y sort of album. And then Led Zeppelin 4 was kind of half that, half the rocker stuff. And then this album was just totally different. Like you say, it's like it takes you on an adventure kind of. And No Quarter and Jamaica and the ocean and Over the Hills and Far Away. It's a very like just out there kind of spacey album. And it doesn't sound like any other Led Zeppelin albums in existence. So it's really, really good.
Yeah, I guess I've never really compared it to any of their other albums because I feel like no matter what Led Zeppelin does, it sounds like Led Zeppelin. Like they could, like you said, they're doing a Jamaican, something inspired by Jamaica or blues, and you're just like, oh, this is, it's Led Zeppelin. Like it's not like, who is this? Like,
yeah,
it's just something their power of their songwriting you can instantly tell it's Led Zeppelin. But yeah, so there's no like, that song just reminds me of, yeah, like, I don't know if it's just everything going on right now, but it's just kind of like, get me away from somewhere, take me someplace else. And it just reminds me of like an open road, you know, and opportunity. So it's just, yeah, it's a very freeing album. So that's what it kind of reminds me of.
Yeah,
And I love like the whole thing, listening to its entirety.
It's super good. And, you know, I with Led Zeppelin, you know, all of their records were basically good, you know, their entire catalog. They never, because John Bonham died in 1980, they never had like a bad period, you know, like where, oh, these guys have been going on for so long, like I'm over it, Zeppelin.
Yeah.
Okay, they ended and they were still really good.
Right.
So it's just classic stuff, and that album in particular does have a different feel, and I wouldn't have thought about it. And now all of a sudden I'm thinking about it, and it's like, yeah, it does kind of feel like a travel sort of. Yeah. I get it.
Thanks. I appreciate it. I knew you would, Dave.
Yeah,
You always
I
do.
know.
Well, not always, but.
Most of the time.
So what's your third one?
Okay, so my third and final one was Atmosphere. God Loves Ugly, and I don't have a physical of it, but I thought I did, but I didn't have it. I only had it digitally. And the reason why I chose this record came out in 2002, and at that point I was living in Florida. I moved there towards the end of 2001, and by coincidence, a week before 9/11. So it's like you move to a new city, and then all of a sudden 9/11 happens. And
Yeah.
it's like, fuck, what am I supposed to do? So I moved into this town in Florida. I kind of moved there sort of because this woman I knew was living there. And I moved down there, and that quickly became a non-issue, right? So now here I was in this new city where I didn't hardly know anybody, and I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do, etc. And I really wasn't that into too much new music, you know. I was in this lost period where I didn't really care, and I got a job, and I was working in this real sort of corporate environment, and I wasn't a boss, but I was a team lead. Okay, so I had like 4 or 5 people underneath me, and I was technically the boss of my little team, right?
Yeah.
And then I had a couple bosses above me, of course, but I was the boss of these guys. And most of the people were significantly younger than me. So I was like 31, and most of these guys were like 21, 22, because it was a lot of first jobs and people who, you know, you didn't have to have a degree necessarily to do the stuff that was needed in my team, right?
Sure.
So eventually, you know, I started hanging out with these guys. They became my friends and stuff like that. And I just really could not bond with these people because of age. Like I was 10 years older than most of them. I was sort of their boss.
Okay.
Used to hang out. We didn't really bond on anything, and they'd listen to this music that I hated, and it was just really bad. But then all of a sudden, I heard this rap album, Atmosphere. And as I was saying when you were talking about the Fugees, I had kind of abandoned rap in about 96. I sort of thought it couldn't get any better than Dr. Octagon, the first album, Octagonacologist. I didn't think rap could get any better. I thought that was the peak. I wasn't hearing anything else I liked, and I just sort of stopped listening to it.
Yeah.
Until I heard Atmosphere, and that was the first time where I was just like, whoa, stop the presses. What the fuck is this? Like, this sounds super good. It had a modern feel, but it also had that classic early 90s hip-hop feel. And the MC Slug was just really good. And you know, sometimes his lyrics would be pretty stupid and you know, the usual kind of sexist rap shit, but then sometimes he could be really, really deep and say a lot of cool shit, and phrased it in ways that rap wasn't doing at that time. Like rap at that point, 2002, was a lot of like, you know, move bitch, get out the way. And, you know, kind of just dumb shit.
Timberland, Little John. I don't know who, I didn't listen to a lot of rap during like the early 2000s. I guess like Method Man, like no.
I think it was more late 90s even, might have been, you know.
Yeah.
But you know, after Wu-Tang, I didn't even follow most of the Wu-Tang guys. I mean, I just.
Yeah. I feel like the early like 2000s was like, you know, kind of into that Timberland, you know, where it was becoming more, and like Nelly, it was kind of becoming like that total like poppy.
And also that dirty South stuff like Master P, Bout It, that was huge back in 2002. And that was what
Yeah.
a lot of these guys would listen to, that Southern. I mean, I was in Florida, that was the South. So I guess maybe that's what people like, but Master P and all of the guys on his label, because he had an empire with all this dirty South rap. And I just didn't like any of it. I mean, Bout It's an okay tune, but I mean, Master P had like 20 albums out, and it's like, who needs all this shit,
Yeah.
So I reconnected with rap because of God Loves Ugly, and I kind of had a little way of bonding with my coworkers, because it was like, you do spend a lot of time at work, and we had late hours and all this. So it was like a little like positive sign, a positive time out of a really shitty 3 years that I lived in Florida, because I was just like miserable in that area. It was a total mistake to have gone there. And I felt like, I got to get the fuck out of here. And even though like they offered me a bunch of money to stay, and I was just like, I just don't want to do it. I mean, I don't care. I hate it here and whatever. And when I look back at that time, 2001 to 2004, I don't really have a lot of positive memories of that time. I still have a friend or two that from that period that I'm still connected with through like Facebook and stuff.
Sure.
But beyond that, like, it's just in the rear view. However, when I moved back to Omaha in 2004, with Atmosphere being from Minneapolis, they played in Omaha a lot. So now all of a sudden, I get to see their sort of ascension as they're going from Sokol Underground to Sokol upstairs to next time playing in some bigger place. And so then all of a sudden, Atmosphere was super huge. I mean, I even got a crazy Atmosphere story where when they played at Sokol Underground, this must have been 04, 05 or something like that.
Okay.
And it was my brother, it was a 1% show. And Atmosphere, Slug himself had kicked out this girl who was in the front row for being too wasted. He asked for her to be removed, okay? And so security took her out, and she was outside. I watched her sneak back in, okay? And you remember Sokol Underground.
Yeah, I'm like, how do you sneak in there?
You have to walk downstairs, and then they're collecting tickets like at the bottom of the steps. But there was always a crowd over there, and she just like slid around.
Okay.
So I saw her do this, but I didn't work there, and I didn't have, I didn't have a job there. I was just more or less hanging out.
Yeah.
I saw her go to the ladies' room. And so I tried to find a girl that was working at the show, or that I knew, that would run into the bathroom and like keep tabs on this girl or grab her or something. Because I was leery of like grabbing her. I didn't want to like touch her and have her freak out or whatever. So, but I knew she needed to be kicked out, because Slug himself had said, kick that girl out. She's too drunk. So when she came out of the bathroom, I confronted her and I said, hey, you're not supposed to be in here or whatever. And she's like, who the fuck are you? And she took a swing at me and like hit me in the face, But it was like one of those deals where about 75% of the way there, like right about here, she kind of realized I probably shouldn't be doing this and kind of held off. And so the hit was kind of weak.
Oh.
But either way, she still hit me in the face. Her friends saw her do it. They all grabbed her and they're like, we're really sorry. We're taking her home. And they left.
Good.
So that was my Atmosphere
had
story.
someone to take care of her.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really had never gotten into Atmosphere. I really like that album, actually. I saw them didn't they play at a festival a couple years ago here?
I'm trying to think if they ever did Maha or not. They might have.
I thought they did, because I didn't really know too much about them, but I like them. Since I've been working from home, it's good, like, just kind of like background music, and kind of keeps you in like this flow. So I actually really enjoyed listening to that album. I don't know much about Atmosphere. I like them. I'm pretty sure I've seen them before, but yeah, I didn't really know much about
being in Omaha, I'm sure you've seen them before, because they used to play here all the time.
Okay.
I mean, this was one of their big markets. And, like I said, I saw them rise up and they got really big for a point. And then probably about 2012, it started kind of coming down, and now they're just there. You know what I mean? But, and I've kind of lost touch with what they what they're doing. I don't really.
Haven't been keeping up with them. Haven't been.
No, not
writing.
really. I mean, I've seen them 3 or 4 times because they played here so many times. And if they did say play Maha, then I saw them there, I'm sure. I just don't specifically remember it, but no, and it still stands up. I mean, I think that revisiting that album for this thing, I enjoyed it, and I remembered kind of why I liked it. It did have that mix of older school, early to mid 90s rap, and then but it didn't sound like throwback music. It still had a certain kind of modern feel to it. But I think what differentiates Atmosphere for me with so much of the other rap, especially what was going on at that time, was it wasn't booty rap or whatever. He wasn't singing, you know, songs just that had nothing, no meaning. It was just all about the beat. Like, he's got good beats, but he also does have something to say, and he has a good voice. I think his tone as an MC, I think, is really strong.
Yeah,
So,
he does have a good voice.
Yeah, so I really like it, and like I said, it was the only bright spot of my entire 3-year experience as a Floridian.
Well, I'm glad you got some Atmosphere into your orbit.
Yeah, I needed it. I needed it because most of those guys were listening to like Incubus and just like and all that booty rap and whatever, and it's just like I can't listen to this, you know. 20 years ago I was too old for this shit, you know. I was just like, I can't take this any longer.
Yeah.
No mas.
No mas.
Yeah, no mas.
Well, that's a good story. I like that, and I do like that album. That's like the one thing I enjoy about our conversations, Dave. I hear about a new album, and then I end up like one that I've never heard before, and now I'm like, oh, now I can.
Okay, all right. Well, thanks again for doing it.
Yeah, this was fun.
All right, everybody, thanks for watching. I hope you guys dug that. Working on something big for my number 200, which is my next video coming up in a couple weeks. So, you know, fingers crossed we get it done on time. Thanks a lot for watching, everybody. Take care.